So, how is everyone finding Fontaine so far? Is it good? Are the water mechanics you're liking perhaps? If so, that's great to hear. We're finding Fontaine ourselves to be a breath of fresh air after almost a year of updates for Sumeru, much like Inazuma once back then. So now that we have a blank sheet to start off with for Fontaine lore and culture, there is much to cover. To start off, I want to look into Lyney and Lynette first, as they are the first phase of 4.0 along with being the first previewed characters for Fontaine. For these videos, I'll be planning to do them for various other characters in the future, including any rerun characters if time to spare. For this, I will basically look into every single detail on the character, whether it links to them in-game or a traditional or cultural detail that matches with the theme of said region. And by the way, when I say every single detail, I mean every single detail, or at least what we found thus far. We probably won't include personality or story at the moment perhaps, because they're new characters and the script was planned prior to their release. I will have titles laid out below for references if you want to skip ahead on certain parts to learn about a certain thing. So now that we have those things out of the way, let's start with some details in their kits, as I'm sure we are far more familiar with this at the moment compared to what we'll be looking at later on. For kit references, let's start off with Lynette. For her normal attack Rapid Right Sword, the name Right Sword here is quite an interesting reference. Firstly, those swords have a tight connection with Masonic ceremonial swords, which were usually very slim and covered in different biblical symbols. Ultimately, they were a variation of rapier, a type of sword with a slender and sharply pointed two-edged blade that was popular in Western Europe, both for civilian use, duel, and self-defense, and it was used as a military sidearm throughout the 16th and 17th century. Rapiers are single-handed weapons, and they were often employed with off-hand bucklers, daggers, cloaks, and even second-hand swords to assist with defense. It's also worth mentioning that in Russian translation for her normal attack is called Rapid Sacrificial Rapier. For her skill, Agmatic Feint, while she uses her skill, she can literally make herself disappear. So this can also be a reference to magic tricks and how magicians are able to make things appear and disappear in a split second. As for her burst, Magic Trick Astonishing Shift is another magic trick where she summons the cat in the hat just like her brother, with the exception of the cat's body. Her specialty is making things appear and disappear, so of course her best trick shows her abilities. So now, let's move on to her talents. For the first one, Sophisticated Synergy, it may be referring to the character herself. Based on her character story, she is the shadow of Lyney and must perform in harmony to ensure her performance is successful, as it is her role as the mascot, so coordination for her is really important. For props positively prepared, this is probably a reference to her keeping things ready and organized for the performance. She likes to make sure that props are set and ready and gets very focused on that while cleaning. And lastly, for logic-based Mnemotics. A mnemotic, also known as a memory aid, is a tool that helps you remember an idea or phrase with a pattern of letters, numbers, or relatable associations. Mnemotic devices include special rhymes and poems, acronyms, images, songs, outlines, and other tools. It's an exploration talent where she shows the location of recovery orbs. This can be a reference to her showing these techniques to memorize stuff easily. Okay, now let's move on to her constellation. The first constellation, A Cold Blade Like a Shadow, is another reference to her being a shadow of Lyney. While he is the center of attention, she operates in the shadows a bit farther from the people's gaze. For her second constellation, Endless Mysteries, this might not only be a reference to their performances and magic tricks, but also their past, which is not something a lot of people know about. For her third constellation, Cognition Inverting Gaze, this is probably a reference to how people process information, specifically regarding magic tricks, because the audience always sees performances as a certain view or angle, while the real magic happens far from their gaze. For the fourth constellation, Tactic Coordination, when the twins are performing, according to Lynette's character story, they always make sure their moves are coordinated with the trust of the assistant and the magician. It's important for her to understand his next moves because he really likes to add new things to their performances. Since they have been together since the moment they were born, now they understand each other without a word. For the fifth constellation, Obscuring Ambiguity, I'd like to say this can also apply to performances of her as a character, because as a magician, most tricks are illusion or lies. You never know whether that's true or not. Though for Lynette herself, this is probably a reference to her past or the way she says stuff that can confuse people sometimes. And lastly, the sixth constellation, Watchful Eye. This could be a reference to her keeping an eye on people in general, but she always has paid more attention to her brother as she cares about him dearly. She may not talk too much sometimes, but she cares for him just as much as he does. After all, he is her only family. To make sure no one harms him ever again, she is like a cat which observes others from aside, making sure that people are dear to her are safe. Just like it's mentioned in her outfit description once again, a cat resides in the shadows until it wishes to show itself, inscrutable, just like a magician's assistant. Now that we looked at Lynette's, let's have a look at Lyney's. For Lyney's kit, we will start off with his normal attack just like Lynette. For his normal attack, Card Force Translocation, his normal attack streaks is a very flashy and is a clear reference to card manipulation techniques, which are also present in his idol. Making cards move by magical force is his forte after all. For his skill Bewildering Lights, it is also another reference to skill performance as he takes off his hat and bows in front of the enemy, symbolically ending a show for them. Kind of dark if you think about it. As for his burst, Wondrous Trick, Miracle Parade, this is probably the best trick up his sleeve as he performs into his signature grinning cat. He creates a small parade for the enemies, and with the end of the show, he ends enemies' lives. But in this case, he creates the illusion of distraction to divert and escape. And if you read his character story, the cat's name is Rosalind, and one of the many cats he and his sister have adopted. Now, let's move on to his talents, starting off with Breathless Performance. This is a straight up reference to his performances and nothing much to add here. I guess the only thing is that his tricks might get a bit dangerous or risky sometimes, and as they say, you don't want to play with fire. For a conclusive ovation, it is a reference to the end of the show, as people get up from their seats to show their appreciation for the performance given by the greatest magician in Teyvat. They give him a few round of applause, and the next show ends, and so does the lies and illusions. And lastly, for trivial observations, this is perhaps a reference to how he likes to observe people to understand them to the point of looking at even the smallest details to use for his little own benefit. But since it's an exploration passive, I assume it's just he notices every single detail. Now, moving on to his constellations this time. His first constellation, Whimsical Wonders, is probably just a reference to his magic tricks, and that's about it. Not too much detail here. For his second constellation, Loquacious Cajoling. This is probably one of the most interesting references here, as this correlates with his personality. It's pretty obvious with this whole theme of lies, illusions, and magic. Cajole is to flatter or deceive someone, or in other terms, cajole them into doing something. Meanwhile, for Loquacious, it means full of excessive talk, ultimately meaning full of talk just to deceive someone into something, which might have a connection with the name Trivial Observations. He would be the type of person to observe someone and analyze their personality just to talk them into something that might only benefit him. For his third constellation, Prestidigitae. Yeah, this one tells us that Lyney is indeed a talented and skilled magician. Even though he likes to brag about himself, he seems to be genuinely good at what he does. For his fourth constellation, well-versed, well-rehearsed, this can be a reference to him thoroughly planning his performances even to the smallest details, but this can also hint to his personality and him planning ahead and being prepared for whatever comes next. In a sense, being able to predict the best outcome for him. For his fifth constellation, to pierce enigmas, this is an interesting one. At first, it feels like a way of seeing the mysteries behind magic tricks, but on the other hand, maybe Lyney will uncover or already did uncover some mysteries about people and events from his past. The basis of all magic tricks are lies and illusions, so it's interesting to see his past being covered by a flashy facade of lies. And lastly, for his last constellation, Guard His Smile, this one ties into the theme of him having this fake smile all the time, and this is very clear in his character story. This can be seen throughout his whole character. As a performer, he always attracts attention, so being cheerful and happy is a part of his role as an actor, but ultimately, this smile makes it harder for some people to see through his lies. This can be a reference to his outfit description too. Cats only stretch in front of those they trust completely. Otherwise, they merely hide their claws behind a smile. Intimate yet reserved, just like the sweet words of this magician. This means he hides his true self under this mysterious smile and many lies. Now moving on to some culture inspiration for the character designs of both Lyney and Lynette, we will talk about their clothing separately, even if a few things are repeated, and then we'll mention any features about them that are similar for that purpose as shown in their design. We will start off with their names. Lynette is a girl's name of wealth origin. This name translates to nymph or idol. This form emerged in Tennyson's story of Sir Gareth and Lynette in one of his Idylls of the King. In Orpheum legend, the meaning of the name Lynette is sister of Lyonors. The addition of "et" to its name also hints that it is the French diminutive of the name Lynn. This name, meaning idol, probably just refers to Lynette being naturally pretty, but the variation nymph is what's interesting here. For all of you, this name would be familiar. In Greek mythology, nymphs were usually regarded as benevolent beings. They would often be found roaming through the woods, hunting or watching over flocks. These included Nereids, Nereids, and occasionally the Oceanids who inhabited the water, like the sea, river, and springs. This can refer to what we saw in the 4.0 trailer for Fontaine or the teaser The Final Feast, with Lyney doing tricks inside the water tank for the show. However, this does not necessarily mean that she is technically an Oceanid, and so far for Lynette, she possesses more distinct feline features such as her tail and cat ears. As for the name Lyney, his name is a bit more confusing. However, his name could derive from the name in the same story as Lynette's. For Lyney in this case, he is Lynor, or the sister of Lynette. It does sound weird as Lynor is a girl, but perhaps they wanted to create a story and change up the gender to create Lyney. On top of that, Lioness refers to a lion, or for Lynor, little lioness. Meanwhile, the name Lyney itself, in French origin, is referred to as little lion. And that's where we believe the names Lynette and Lyney came from. So now, let's have a look at their designs. From here, we'll start off with Lynette. For Lynette, her design looks like a mix of traditionally acrobat outfit style while mixing in a bit of a magician look that Lyney does as well, with the additional modern style to the clothing as well. Starting off with the black suit she is wearing, in terms of her outfit, even though it looks nothing special at first, it actually resembles the outfit of an acrobat, who was known to be skilled with different tricks performed at circuses. The match of the leotard can also correlate with how Lynette mostly does tricks as a magician's assistant, while Lyney focuses more on magic. Originally, there was thought that Lyney was wearing a corset as it was a thing acrobats used to wear around the 18th century, but this is more of a 50-50 of it being possible, but we'll let you decide on that one. Along with her dress, there is a mixture of different other features to mix up with. With the acrobat dress, there is a bit of lace from the front part in a V-line up to Lynette's chest. This kind of pattern is a frill trim or a ruffle. This is noticeable on the dress as well, especially on the ends with the frilly patterns. For Lynette, this is a match of hers as well, along with the layer underneath matching her turquoise color theme. The frilly skirt of the dress also has straps with a belt on every frill of the skirt. The straps match something similar to what Lyney has, and they look similar to belt suspenders. One last thing to notice for the dress is the black style in contrast to the bright colors displayed for the acrobats on the posters. This could fit into her color scheme or theme with her brother of the black cat trope, as we've clearly seen in their splash art and kit. So, moving on from the dress, somewhat, let's look at the sleeves. Again, Lynette doesn't have the sleeveless look that the acrobats have. Lynette's looks like the sleeves were a layer over her dress, but other than that, the sleeves look like French white puff sleeve shirt top, which is a bit specific and not exactly what we were looking for, but it was close enough. In the end, it could also be a case of fixing in the frill parts of the dress and adding coverage to her arms with a blouse with black straps underneath the puff of the sleeves. Puff sleeves similar to this originated from the Renaissance and became popular in the 1930s, so from the 14th to the 17th century. As for the gloves she's wearing, she's most likely wearing magician gloves with a mix of white and black to complement her outfits, as the black on top of white is a really nice combination. With the match of the magician aesthetic for Lynette, just like Lyney, Lynette also has a capelet, or also known as a shoulder cape, for her left shoulder only, and as usual, the same turquoise color scheme. Capelets were common around the medieval Europe and popular in the 19th century. Inside the capelet is a diamond checkered pattern, or acrylic. We looked up to see if there's anything behind the checkered pattern, but it could mean the symbolism of illusion, as checkered patterns are most common for optical illusions, which makes sense for the two siblings with their tricks. To add on for the capelet for a small detail, the purpose of the shoulder being covered in both is said to be a practical use to keep the arm free. If you compare Lynette's normal attacks with a sword, she uses the hand free from the capelet, her right hand. I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, as sometimes certain pieces of clothing for 3D models are removed to make characters' movements more fluent, but it is a very nice detail nonetheless. Last bit for Lynette here is her boots. There wasn't much correlation with these kind of boots and the appearance of acrobats, though some examples from posters do wear boots, while others would wear shoes you would see in ballet or dancing shoes. As for Lynette, her boots are more familiar to black lace boots called mid-calf boots. Mid-calf boots were commonly worn among women in the 19th and 20th century. Also, I don't know if it's important, but Lynette has a small highlight in her hair to match turquoise, and for the tights, they are 15 dinner black tights. Now with a bit of her clothing covered, how about we move on to idol animations for a bit? Yes, we're looking into those too. So, starting off with this animation, she plays a trick of illusion with the card disappearing and replaced with a teacup and plate. The card before disappearing has a picture of a teacup. When Lynette is stirring the tea, she is using a spoon known as the iced teaspoon or coffee tea stirrers, basically longhand teaspoons. When she drinks tea, if you look closely, Lynette has her pinky out when drinking before placing it back on the plate. All this is a form of tea etiquette. This includes the plate and spoon in her idol too. This etiquette is a custom for highborn ladies in the 18th century and somewhat familiar in England. Perhaps some are familiar with the stereotype of tea and crumpets in the United Kingdom. As for the second idol animation, it's a small detail with Lyney, so I'll compare that later on. But for now, let's look at Lyney. From first glance, his outfit seems to be a changed version of the suit most magicians wore during their performances, which ultimately was just a regular suit but with a tailcoat. Since Fontaine is probably based on the time of French Revolution, his outfit starts to make more sense because around the end of the 18th century was the technological changes triggered by the French Revolution, and this affected the process of materials such as woolen fabrics and muted colors placed by the pattern skills and waved away from modest and rational attire. In the realm of men's fashion, the bourgeois age of the 19th century brought about the permanent abolishment of gloriously colored silk attire in. The dress coat was gradually replaced by the frock coat and then tailcoat later on. Although this fits his design and color scheme pretty well, you can notice a red diamond checkered pattern on the back of his tailcoat. This is probably a little detail in relation to magic and cards as well as illusions which magicians are known for, as I mentioned above. We can also assume that his outfit might be references to what acrobats used to wear, just like Lynette but for a man. The outfit was usually pretty plain and simple to allow a performer more freedom with their movements. There was more variations of it, but most of the time it was a jumpsuit with shorts instead of full-length pants. On his top half, he wears a variation of a ruffled shirt, which was also called a poet shirt. This was originally worn by men in the 17th and 18th centuries. They had more puffy ruffles on the front. Based on all of these, I can say that his outfit is more of a mix of everything mentioned here, with the addition of ruffle patterns just like his sister have, with the differences of ruffles materials falling horizontally while Lynette's is vertically. But there's also some minor details such as his suspenders, which he probably wears just to hold his tights in place, and his boots, which are just a variation of the ones Lynette is wearing but bigger in size. I also want to add, as we mentioned for Lynette previously, she had a capelet on one side for more practical use with a weapon. Lynette as well has a capelet but on the opposite side. Adding on to this, Lynette's capelet is also for practical use. When choosing his weapon or carrying his bow, or using a handle, he uses his left hand like Lynette uses her right hand. In the end, the detail still stands for Lynette as well. Another interesting detail is their top hats. They were tall, flat-crowned hats traditionally associated with formal wear in Western dress codes, meaning white tie, morning dress, or frock coat. Traditionally made of black silk or sometimes gray, the top hat emerged in Western fashion by the end of the 18th century. The black top hat was made from cheese coat, linen flannel, and selleck. Using various types of flat irons, the selleck was baked in linen around 5 pieces of wood hat blocks and covered with black silk plush, which came mostly from France. We can spot both Lynette and Lynette wearing them or using them in their idols. As I mentioned before, we will cover that idol a bit more later on. As for his other idol animation, this is centered around a similarity to his whole kit, and that is cards. This can also be seen in the 4.0 trailer. While he shows off his magic skills, you can spot some cute hidden details on them. These cards represent all 3 of the siblings, with the blue hat and teacup being Lynette, little penguin being Lynette, and red hat being Lyney himself. Although, if you weren't careful enough, you probably missed another card with his black cat in the hat, which is also the card that he holds in his splash art. Those tricks are essentially called card manipulation techniques, commonly used amongst magicians. Card manipulation is the branch of magic that deals with creating effects using sleight of hand techniques involving playing cards. Card manipulation is often used in magical performances, especially in close-up, parlor, and street magic. Illusions performed with playing cards are constructed using basic card manipulation techniques. That such sleights are performed in a manner which is undetectable to the audience. However, that result takes practice and through understanding of method. Manipulation techniques include lifts, false steals, slide slips, passes, palmings, etc. Okay, quick break from all that. So, we have covered a lot for the 2 of them separately, but there's still more to go. Other than what we have looked at, there are also a few things to consider when we piece them together, which has brought me to this conclusion that Lyney and Lynette are representing the cerebral hemisphere, which basically means the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain in neuroscience. Now, I know that sounds very far-fetched, but once we look into these details, you'll understand where I'm going with this. Let's just say the theme of opposites while also sharing similarities in design really plays a part for these 2. We will look at the theme of the cats first, starting off with their constellation. Oh, and by the way, this is still character details, we are not going to any theories. This is just what we found in game, and I am sorry if it comes up like that. For Lynette and Lyney, their constellation names are Phyllis Alba for Lynette and Phyllis Fucus for Lyney. Lynette's constellation translates to white cat, with Lyney's translating to Black Cat, which perfectly represents the abilities, kits, and even personalities. Ultimately, they really resemble opposites as mentioned, but this isn't the only thing. Let's take a closer look at the cats in their splash art and constellation. First of all, both the cats in the constellation have a water drop or a star. The star represents Lynette, and the teardrop represents Lyney. For the cats in the splash art, take a look at the cats they summon or transform during combat. Lynette's cat is more of just a head with a bow in front, like Lyney's does, with Lynette herself representing the cat. While for Lyney's, his cat is actually a cat, and with a tail and most importantly, a body whilst having a big bow on its back. This can hint to them being represented as opposites again. Along with this, unlike the cats in their constellations having either a teardrop or star eye, or technically where they're facing us, both of the cats in the splash art have the same star and teardrop markings for the eyes, with the teardrop on the right like Lyney, and the star on the left like Lynette. The whole right and left troll will be important later on during the comparison, so please keep that in mind. I'm sure you're all familiar with the markings on their cheeks too, right? But that isn't all. Along with these eyes, the cats also have different expressions, with Lynette's cat being sad and Lynette's cat being happy. While that probably hints at their personalities, with Lynette being quiet and even scary sometimes, and Lynette being happy and energetic, who likes being the center of attention, this can also be related to theater and art performances. That is what they do after all with their magic shows. But you must be wondering, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the masks, sock, and buskin, which are two ancient symbols of comedy and tragedy. Melampheme, the muse of tragedy, is often depicted holding the tragic mask and wearing buskins. Thalia, the muse of comedy, is similarly associated with the mask of comedy and comic socks. These go back to the ancient Greece when these masks were used in early plays to represent the emotions the characters were feeling. It was easier for audiences who were sitting far away from the stage to see the masks and emotions they were portraying. Lyney and Lynette are on stage after all, so it would make sense to see a small connection. Aside from the cats, there are similarities and opposites for the two, which I said we would look at comparing the two. So, let's move back to their clothing. For similarities, both of them are wearing tights and boots, with one of them wearing belt suspenders, and they are both wearing outfits acrobats will wear, with Lyney covering his chest and Lynette covering her arms and shoulders. They are also both wearing gloves. Now for some opposites that are yet similar. For a few noticeable details, Lynette's fringe is on the left, but Lyney's is on the right. The black strap is on the opposite ends for them, and this also includes the capelet they have and the braids on the opposite ends. Lyney's is on the left and Lynette's is on the right. The first time it was the opposite on the usual side, as I'm sure you've noticed by now. If we exclude the left and right trope temporarily, even the additional clothing with the checkered patterns are opposite as well. The tailcoat for Lyney below and Lynette's bow on top. And might I add that the colors are also complementary as well? Okay, now that's everything on the clothes. So, moving on to something else. Remember the second idol animation I was going to discuss later in detail? Well, here it is. For the idol animation I left out, it features the two of them spinning their top hats. For a small detail, it shows this trick is called hat manipulation. Yep, it has a name. Hat manipulation itself is a type of performance that uses skills and dexterity for amusement, either using a brawler or a top hat as the prop. Skills include throwing and catching in various ways and rolling the hat from different parts of the body. In animation, both Lynette and Lyney roll their top hat along their arm and spin the hat like a basketball. So they both do the trick with the addition of the hat popping out of Lyney's hat. So what's the difference between the two? Well, if you notice when looking back at it, for Lyney he spins his hat up before twirling and landing on the left using his right hand. Whereas for Lynette, she spins the hat below her and twirls and lands on the right using her left hand. It could make for a sweet pose if you capture the animation just right. Again, for a mention, this one isn't included with the right-left trope, but there is one last thing. Do you remember the That trailer featuring Lynette and Lyney together? So what if I told you the opposites were there again? That's right. In the poses, Lynette was on the left and Lyney was on the right. Now, from our perspective, that isn't correct, but from theirs, it is. I believe that's just a coincidence, but it does tell how symbolic they were with Lynette on the left and Lyney on the right, with the differences being their hand coordination and the addition of their idol and braids. I suppose a braid on one end with all best parts of their design would look a bit strange, wouldn't it? So, after looking at opposite and pattern of Lynette being on the left and Lyney being on the right, I did check if it had some correlation of the left and right hemisphere due to their opposites are working together when applying both. And, in terms of their sides, they do. Lynette would be the more logical one in remembering words, and Lyney would be the creative one in recognizing faces. I personally feel this suits them based on what we can see about them at first glance. But we could be wrong in the end, but who knows. Now, I do know some of you will be thinking, but what about the dominant hand I mentioned before? With Lyney supposedly being left-hand dominant and Lynette vice versa because of the small detail in which hands are using the weapon. It doesn't make sense of what I'm going with. However, What if I told you it did and actually solidifies the idea of Lynette and Lyney representing the cerebral hemisphere? So, if some are familiar with this, the right brain has motor control of the left hand, and the left brain has the motor control of the right hand. The right hand uses the left brain, the left hand uses the right brain. Now, considering Lyney is the right brain and uses his left hand, and Lyney is the left brain and uses her right hand, do you see the resemblance here from what I'm saying? Based on looking at every detail on both of them, Hoyever's design team was definitely going into opposites here. This could all be a coincidence, but I do think it's really cool to consider. Wouldn't you agree? Alright, well, it looks like we're reaching the conclusion of all this. But before we end the video, I would like to look at one last thing that is more additional to the topic, but it's still a character detail at the end of the day, and that is their special dishes and a small possible reference for them. First off, I will start off with Lynette's dish, a leisurely sip. For the cup, the patterns on the teacup match that of the same cup Lynette drinks out of in her idol animations, and the drink is most likely latte, as the artwork of the cat is that originated with 3D latte art or espresso because of the frothed milk required for the 3D art to pop out. Three-dimensional latte art was created by Kohei Matsuno, and it was first seen in Hat Coffee in Taito Ward, Tokyo. As for the rest, the cat biscuits look similar to the card patterns of the smiley cat we would see on Lyney, with a small turquoise bow on the right, smaller than Lyney's for his dish. To add on for the biscuits, they are a special dish for conch madeleines, which would technically make them madeleines shaped as a cat head. These pastries are a small sponge cake and originate from Comestry in Lorraine, France. Madeleines are often debated as tea or cakes due to their complementary flavor they have for tea, or I suppose in this case is latte. One last noticeable detail is the ears of the napkin, which is on the left from our perspective. Lynette as well has this detail for the napkin, but on the right side. This plays again into the left and right trope they have. With Lynette's special dish, Cupid Tricks, Lynette also has a smiling cat symbol, but the bow is much larger than Lynette's. Could it be that the bows representing the cats in the splash art are right here in the dish? Maybe? Maybe it could. Who knows? One other thing that is noticeable in Lynette's dish is it's a bit messier, with small parts of the sugars on the napkins, while for Lynette, she has a plate for the biscuits to keep it all neat and organized. For the details separate to Lynette, the most obvious is the Rubik's looking cube. And by the way, these are not sugar cubes. They're actually gummies, all mixed with different little flavors. This can be earned as a special dish from pâté de fruit. They are part of a traditional French confiterie that is made of set fruit paste, and there are many different choices. If you were familiar with those sweet gumdrops you would eat in the packet, that's basically what this is. So, now we got that done, on to the last thing. For little references we wanted to add. We did want to add this as well. We weren't so sure at first, but we did want to add everything. While we were looking at cat references, you can't help but notice the similarities, like the back of Lynette's card or the little charm on both the twins with a grinning cat. Could that image of a cat be related to something else? But that's what we believe, because this might be a reference to Alice in Wonderland. It was a book in 1965 written by Lewis Carroll, specifically to the treasure cat, featured as one of the most important characters in the story. There is a phrase, "grin like a treasure cat," associated with that mysterious smile. The treasure cat is a member of the Dutch household. When it appears before Alice, it assures her that everyone in Wonderland is mad and that it doesn't matter which path she follows if she doesn't care where she's going. Most everyone's mad here. You may have noticed that I'm not here all by myself. At one point, the cat disappears gradually until nothing is left but its grin, prompting Alice to remark that she has often seen a cat without a grin, but never a grin without a cat. The image of the grinning cat in the story strangely resembles the images of the cat shown on both the twins' clothing and Lynette's cards. Now, can the story of Alice and the Queen of Hearts be relevant to the actual story of Fontaine? There is also this effect called the treasure cat effect. According to Google, quote by Sally Dushan and Bob Miller, the treasure cat effect is a binocular rivalry which causes a stationary object seen in one eye to disappear from the view when an object in motion crosses in front of the other eye. I wonder, could this be in reference to Lyney and Lynette perhaps? But for now, that is everything we have found in the twins, and personally, I think the research was really interesting in my opinion. Even if some things may be false or true, I still think it was really fun in the end of the day. We do plan to make more of these, and we're already planning one on for Lynette, and we might consider one for Child, depending on our time. But for now, folks, that is all, and we will see you soon for the next potential video. Bye bye! I do want to mention there's like around 43 minutes of unedited audio and my voice is really sore. I hope it was worth it.